This program is a paid commercial announcement and in no way represents the views of WPHT or its management.
Now on Talk Radio 1210, WPHT, WPHT, HD, WOGL, HD3, Philadelphia. Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor.
If we don't move in our own direction, we're going to become extinct. In fact, in some cases, we're close to being extinct right now.
Presented by Weinerman Pain and Wellness, serious doctors for serious injuries, and powered by the law offices of Pond, Lehocky, Stern, Giordano. Talk, listen, and speak to the region's most influential leaders. It's Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor.
We begin Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor on Saturday night, January 6th, paying honor to 42-year-old Lieutenant Matthew Letourneau from Engine 45, who lost his life today doing battle at a fire that started at 9 a.m. this morning. Good evening, everybody, and welcome into Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor. A tough way, J-Doc, to begin our very, very first show of 2018, but don't want to let the moment go by without taking just a second to honor the lieutenant who spent 11 years on the fire department and today paid the ultimate sacrifice.
You know, Joe, it's always so difficult when our first responder or any of our workers go to work and don't come home, and certainly braving the tragic the elements out there and having something so tragic happen. Our thoughts and prayers are with the lieutenant and his family, and of course all the firefighters in the city of Philadelphia and throughout the land. With today's show, we're going to have Buddy Osborn on, and he's a minister, and he certainly wanted to say something, in honor of the individual.
Yeah, we just want to extend our prayers and our thoughts with the families, and as they mourn and grieve the loss of a loved one, a father and a husband.
Also lost in that fire, a person inside the home. So 2 deaths claimed by that tragedy today in Philadelphia. Again, 42-year-old Lieutenant Matthew Letourneau, 11 years of service to the city of Philadelphia and to all of our people around the Delaware Valley. In this moment of silence, we salute the lieutenant for a job well done, and of course paying the ultimate sacrifice today.
Absolutely. Just listen, in your time of need, when you're, it was a row house in North Philadelphia that collapsed, and obviously there was a fire and the building collapsed. So, can't say it enough for individuals that are giving all. And so, thoughts and prayers. Okay, so
welcome in back, everybody, into Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. We're presented in part by Weinerman Pain and Wellness. We're powered by Pond Lehocky. We're driven by Chaplin Ford and our good buddy Jim Stevenson, and we're supported, of course, by the Sonesta Hotel, and we always send a big shout-out to the Sheet Metal Local 19 for helping make this program possible on a Saturday night. We begin 2018 here on PHT with John Kane, who's going to join us. We have a very, very special show lined up for our listening audience tonight, of course, referencing Buddy Osborn, who's in studio, and John Kane is going to join us on the hotline. Doc, I'll give you 30 seconds or so just to set the table for our listening audience. Then we'll bring John into the conversation.
Sure. So we're starting a 3-part series about the opioid crisis in Philadelphia, and couldn't be happier than to have John Kane, who's the business manager of Local 690 and a correspondent on our Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor radio show, to talk about the effects of the opioid epidemic in the building trades and of course, throughout his own local. And of course, we're ecstatic to have Buddy Osborn on. Buddy is he's been featured nationally, and certainly he's the chaplain of the Philadelphia building trades, and he's also the founder of Rock Ministries, and just an unbelievable story. It's a great show lined up.
Let's bring John Kane into the conversation and welcome John in to 2018 here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. John, a good Saturday evening to you, sir. How are you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you now,
there
John.
You go. We got you.
Nice work, Glenn. Thank you very much. John, welcome in to Talk Radio 1210. My good friend, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, guys. Good evening, and it's nice to see that you got Buddy Osborn there. What a great guy.
Thanks, John.
I told him you were excited to have him, John, and certainly it's a serious topic we're going to enter into, and you and I talked about it earlier. the opioid epidemic and the devastation that is going on not only in the community but in our union community. Before we get you and Buddy together, talk to us a little bit about why the opioid epidemic is such a priority in our building trades and our union community.
Well, the opioid epidemic, I unfortunately, I have to say, over the years has increased. I can't lie about that. And it seems like, it starts out with a lot of the guys in the construction industry getting hurt. And it also happens with a lot of athletes. They get injured. They get prescribed an opioid of some sort, whether it's Oxycontin, fentanyl. And what ends up happening is they go from that, they overprescribe it by taking more, they abuse it, and then they go into the heroin. And I don't know the reason why they go to the heroin, but from my understanding is because of the fact that it's cheaper,
right?
They do the heroin, and then what ends up happening from there is they get a bad batch of heroin, and they end up overdosing from it. But being a person that's been in recovery for 34 years, now granted, I'm in recovery from alcohol. I've abused drugs in my life, but I do know that there's only 5 things that could possibly happen, and that's pretty much, these people are either going to die from overdoses, commit suicide, because of depression, and that seems to be a real big issue when they become drug addicts. They end up in jail, or basically they get into recovery, and nobody knows that more than me. So I try to push a lot of these guys and young kids that I talk to all the time about trying to get into recovery. It does work, and I'm a proven fact of it.
Now, John, certainly, we have some of our union leaders that have actually filed suit, I think, and I think the electricians have actually filed suit against the drug companies because they market to, the union members, and there have been so many opioid overdoses. Is that something is that a sentiment that the unions are now taking up?
It looks as though that the entire Philadelphia building trades are looking at it. Not only that, but you can look at some of these counties. If I'm not mistaken, Bucks County and Delaware County are also looking into going after these pharmaceuticals. But what seems to be the biggest problem out there are some of the doctors that are overprescribing these drugs.
Sure.
They got to, they're the ones that got to be held accountable here. You have and the ones that are, from what I'm being told, that are overprescribing it are the ones that are the dentists. They're giving people 30 days worth of prescriptions when they probably only need 5 days. And it doesn't take very long, from what I'm hearing, to be addicted to these drugs.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about it, and you hear it in all walks of life. Now it's hitting our union community. What I'd like to do right now is also talk about your friend Buddy Osborn. Buddy is on the front lines in the community. Talk about what he means to you and the Philadelphia building trades and how he impacts the building trades.
Some people cross our path sometimes, Joe, and Buddy happens to be one of them people that cross my path that I will never, ever forget. If everybody in this country or in this world would emulate a little bit of Buddy Osborn, this world would be such a better place. When I see Buddy Osborn, and sometimes, my life's not the greatest life. We all have problems. But when I see him, he lifts my spirits, whether it's through a simple hello, a handshake, or whether it's a hug. He makes you, when I say you, he makes you feel important. And that's something that I've never had before until I met Buddy. And I don't know Buddy. We're both from the trades. I didn't know him. I heard about him through reputations and stuff like that. But what Buddy Osborn is doing down in Kensington, he's offering somebody hope to the less fortunate. And I commend him on that. In my eyes, Buddy Osborn is a modern-day saint. And I mean that when I say that.
He's got a big smile on his face, John.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said he's got a big smile on his face, Buddy.
Well, when I talk, I don't lie. And I honestly mean that. When I say we, the Philadelphia building trades, and not just Plumbers Local 690, we're always going to be there for somebody like Buddy and Rock Ministries to give them a helping hand. What he's done down in Kensington is unbelievable. He's helping kids. They're all from broken homes. Their parents may be addicts. Their parents are incarcerated. Buddy has some tough kids down there, man. He's got some really tough kids, but he's teaching them to be tougher with life skills, building up their confidence. Just boxing alone and getting in physical shape builds up their confidence. And when they leave Rock Ministries, they're leaving with something. And I commend them on that. I really do. Rock Ministries is a safe haven for kids to go to vent if they need to. Place to go where they can leave all their trouble behind them when they enter the Rock. And that's important. These kids need that down there.
John Kane, business manager at Plumbers Local 690, also a correspondent here on Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor. John, I appreciate you coming on a Saturday night, our first show of 2018, and I really, really appreciate the perspective that you set out for us tonight, my friend.
No problem. Happy to help out, and Happy New Year, you guys.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John.
Good stuff from John Kane. We'll meet the individual behind John Kane's great description. Buddy Osborn will join us when we come back after our first commercial break. It's Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor on Talk Radio 1210. WPHT, back in a moment.
I don't want to be defined by a title, but I will say this to you. The word missionary is basically servant. A servant. I'm a pastor.
You're a fighting pastor.
I won't want to go up against George Foreman. but yes, a fighting pastor. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I will fight for the kids.
Back here live on Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Stay tuned for St. Joe's basketball right here tonight at 8 o'clock as St. Joe's takes on the Bonnies of St. Bonaventure. You'll hear all of the action live on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT following, of course, Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor.
So, Joe, I'm ecstatic to have Buddy Osborn on the show.
Me too, man. Good stuff.
Certainly, let me give you our listeners a little intro to Buddy. He's a father. He's a husband. He's a chaplain of Philadelphia Building Trades, union member, former business agent for Roofers Local 30, ordained minister, founder of Rock Ministries, former top amateur boxer, and a community leader. And it's been demonstrated on national TV for his work in the community, on the doorsteps of the opioid epidemic, and on the front lines of poverty, crime, and gang violence by helping young people find a way off the streets through sports and faith. And so, Buddy, I want to welcome you to the show.
Hey, listen, it's an honor, really. I'm grateful to be invited, and you got me, brother.
Well, listen, I mean, we're ecstatic to have you. And one thing I was reading about Buddy, and his quote is, "It's not where you start, it's where you finish." And let me tell you, I use that quote. I love that quote. And tell us a little bit about your story, Buddy. You started off obviously in the neighborhood, roughhouse kid, and went through a difficult time. Was a business agent, and then tell us about the story. How you got to where you're at?
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in Kensington, and I, at the age of 25, I was actually appointed as an organizer for, at the time, it's considered one of the strongest unions in the country, which was the Roofers Union. I worked my way up the ladder, and but prior to that, I had a full-blown boxing career, traveled around the world, represented the United States boxing team 13 times, international competition, was slated for the 1980 Olympics, but at the time, the Olympics were in Russia, so the unions were totally boycotting that, and my boss at the time, John McCullough, he didn't want anybody to go to the Olympics.
I remember that.
Yeah, my background was extensive as a boxer, and then ultimately, I just had an opportunity to work my way up into the Roofers Union, and it was grateful, an amazing opportunity, and like I said, I was one of the youngest ever in the history of the union at the time to be. These guys were legends that I worked for. Stevie Trades and Mike Mangini, and just the whole gang, the whole group.
Sure.
And as you know, as a result of that, I was on the street for about 18 months, and then. I was ultimately indicted, on RICO charges, and I was stripped of the job and placed under house arrest for 28 months, and then ultimately went to prison for 5 years. Came home after that, and then at that point in time, I just had to void my life, and I wanted to do something that was way different than than I was used to, and I come home and my life, I embraced the scriptures, and my life radically changed 20 years ago. 22 years ago, actually.
I read a little bit about the story. I think the date, the date. I don't have the date on me. I have to research it. But what was the moment that you I guess saw the light and made it?
Well, it was December 31st, 1995,
right,
at 8:30 at night, and it was just I just gave my life to Christ at the time, and I haven't turned back, and so I started to go. 6 months later, I wound up in the gulags in Russia. In the prisons, and where kids were incarcerated. I went on a missions trip. And then when I came home from there, I was over there for about a month in Siberia. And I came home from there, and then I wound up on the House of Correction, the block, teaching a Bible study. And I'll never forget it. There was 28 kids that were in this room. And 28 kids, I just shared this at the building trades meeting the other day, 70% of them were in there for homicide, and they were between the ages of 13 and 17. So in my mind, I said, listen, how can I be more effective on the street block so I can, help these kids
right before they
get there, Joe. So I just came up with this idea. I use boxing as a means, because I said, if I can just get a kid to sit down for about 10 minutes, 12 minutes, just for a simple little Bible study. Because you got to remember, Krause was a tough dude. I mean, he had some rough hombres with him. I mean, he was no slacker. So he had trade guys he worked with. He had around him, he had fishermen. He had tax collectors. He had everybody. So what I did was when I would sit with these kids, I just made it so simple for them, and then they were attracted to, like, they want to hear more. And then I said, listen, I could use that on the street block. And then use boxing, my background in boxing, to teach these kids to come in. And man, it was unbelievable what happened. I honestly, Joe, I only wanted just a couple kids, 15, 20 kids. That's all. Just one.
Buddy, help our audience understand what it is to be one of those 13 to 17-year-old kids who are lost in their world, because sometimes I think those who live outside of the world that's not at your doorstep struggle to understand it, and I think sometimes condemn so quickly what's happening there out of ignorance, I think.
Look, if you think of it, our workforce is a lot of our workforce could be in the neighborhood where we're ministering right now. Because you have a lot of these kids have strong backs, and they want a job. They need a job. And I'll tell you what happens. 9 out of 10 kids in the inner city are fatherless. And it's not through any fault of their own. You know what I'm saying? And so what I find is that when you have, and all power to women and all, but when you have a single parent raising a kid in the hood, such as Kensington, it could be a nightmare for the mom. There's no money coming in the house. So what does the kid do? He reverts to slinging drugs on the block. And how do you stop a kid from making $500, $600, $700 a day? I see that. I've dealt with kids. I've dealt with kids coming in. I said, listen, and some of these kids, let me tell you something. Some of these kids can be a CEO of a company. They're so bold, and they don't care.
Right.
They're fearless. And so if you transition that into a positive thing, it's amazing, what can happen. And that's going to lend right into the fact we're building 2 homes now as we speak, and it's called Nehemiah House. And there's an amazing story behind that. But we have an opportunity for 14 young men between the ages of 18 and 25 to come in and live, to be residents in there. And to learn how to fill out an application, to learn how to eat, a meal on time. At 5 o'clock, we want to have everybody eating together. And to have men like yourself and labor leaders and different community leaders come in and spend time with them and see these kids, see mentors come alongside these kids to teach these kids the issues of life that they so desperately need.
And in some cases, and I tell you, I couldn't wait for this conversation because it's so real. The word hope, right? It's one of those. It's a word that means so much to so many people, and without it, the devastating effects are unprecedented.
Look, the opposite of hope is hopelessness. And if you know anything about Kensington right now, as I speak to you, if you drive down there, you're going to see tons of people who are hopeless right now. And sometimes, it's not any fault of their own. Because when I look at these men, these women, and these young kids who are strung out on drugs, you know what I look at? I don't look at a prostitute because she's a disgusting, person who just wants to go out and turn a trick. I don't look at these kids that are hustling to, so they can feed their habit. I look at these kids because these kids were someone's baby, where they sat on the lap of a father and a mother. And I often tell them down there, look, you want to get right, you want to get healthy, you want to get yourself together. I'll take my shoes off barefoot and walk 1,000 miles with you when you want it. Now they have to want it. They have to want to come and get that help. And if they want that help, let me tell you something. We're there 24/7. We've been down there 14 years on the front lines at the epicenter of the drug trade. There's nothing I haven't seen, heard, or experienced.
And that's what I want to transition into in regards to the opioid epidemic. Because you are on the front lines. Johnny Doc says the best way to never forget where you came from is to never leave. You're the epitome of that. And so you didn't build a gym in the far Northeast. You put it right in the community, and that's where your ministry is, and that's where the problems are in the community, and you're attacking them that way. How powerful and devastating is the opioid epidemic in your neighborhood? Describe what it's like in those areas where it's at its worst.
Well, right now we are experiencing an overflow of activity, of traffic, and with young adults, because they closed down the railroad, and in the railroad they were secluded in, entrenched in there, and the Conrail and the city got together, and they shouldn't have been on the railroad, but now they're all over. They're within 30 feet of the Rock Building. I mean, every bridge. 4 weeks ago, I lived under the bridge on Emerald Street for the weekend, and I went and I slept with them, and it was just people think I'm crazy, but you know what? In order to reach the dead, you got to touch them. And when I left there, it was a Sunday morning. I left, and I had brought clothes to change into. And what happened was the clothes were all wrinkled because they were in my truck, because I preach the word every Sunday. So I get there, I'm smelling like crack and K2, and I went up and I preached to about a couple hundred people who half of them were once homeless. And once caught up.
Well, that man right there, and Joe Krause does Krause's coats.
Oh,
and I'm sure he knows where you're talking about. I mean, that's just incredible to go out and experience with an individual. I mean, let me tell you something. I do the same thing, buddy. When I see a homeless person, I say to myself, somebody wronged that person, and somebody disappointed that person. And if you look at it in that manner, that you can understand that everybody's a person, and it's not about looking at that prostitute on the corner as a dirty human being. It's about what happened to that person. Somebody let them down. Now, don't get me wrong. Everybody's responsible for their own issues at one point, but for the decisions they make. But at the same time, it's much deeper than that. We're going to talk when we come back. We're going to talk about how we combat the opioid epidemic, and I want to talk about Rock Ministries and everything Rock Ministries is about.
Does that mean you want me to go to a break?
I don't know what that means, Joe. I think I just stepped on Joe again. I'm sorry.
J-Doc, you're on that side of the room.
I'm sorry.
It's Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. We'll continue our conversation with Buddy Osborn. Brian Weimer in the studio. We'll bring him into the conversation as well as we roll on.
You're going to have people in your life that are going to say, you can't do it. Can I tell you what God says? Yes, you can do it.
And welcome back, everyone, to Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Overdoses killed more people last year than guns or car accidents, as we come to you on a Saturday night with Buddy Osborn, our special guest in studio tonight, and a special series, J-Doc, the opioid epidemic series, or part one of a story or of a series that will never end on this radio station as long as we do this show. But if we can do one thing, if we could use the megaphone and the power of Talk Radio 1210 WPHT, Buddy, to reach into the neighborhoods of the listening audience who aren't in Kensington, who aren't on the corner of Kensington and Somerdale who aren't there, and get them to force change. That may help the process.
I agree. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I just want to say this to you: we see changes, though. We see wins down there, and I think of the church at the Rock. Like on Sunday we meet. Like tomorrow we'll meet. We have I think I don't count them, but it's a full house we usually have, and many of them there understand the process of what it's like to take drugs, and everybody there has lost loved ones, and so but in that, I've had the privilege to marry so many couples,
Right.
and now I've also had the unfortunate thing to bury many kids who have overdosed over the last few years. And
I mean, I was going to ask you about both the successes and when you lose somebody. When you lose somebody, it's got to be just.
Listen, when I have to go and talk to a parent of a 19-year-old or an 18-year-old, 17-year-old, or 22-year-old kid, a male or female, and prepare them for to bury their kid, it's not a good thing. I mean, it's for them.
Let me just say this is what I say. But for the grace of God, there go I. And I live by that. And the reason I don't judge people, I've never taken heroin, but I might be the biggest addict in the room in the city. I just never have done it, and so I don't know. And I've been fortunate enough to not have that type of thing happen in my life, but I've seen it. Like you said, buddy, almost nobody goes unscathed.
It's touched everybody.
You've brought Brian, somebody who is a part of Rock Ministries. Tell us a little bit about Brian.
Well, the interesting about Brian, he was arrested 46 times, sold out heroin addict, and his wife, I married them, I think 4 years ago.
That's correct.
4 years ago.
Yes, sir.
And his wife was just as bad as he is. And so I've seen, and he's one of several couples that were involved in the opioids, abusing the drugs, and now they're married, having children. And so for me, it's a blessing to see the success. And you hit the nail on the head, one of you guys. It's being planted in the hood. It's being planted there. They know we're real. They trust us. That's the prevention. When you love the people, when you love them, and you open your doors. Now, Brian is a guy that's just been around a block several times and some, and he's one of our leaders at the Rock, and his wife is involved heavily at the Rock, and he's one of several couples who were out in the streets now that are attached to the Rock, and they're helping us.
Brian, let me bring you into the conversation and give you the open microphone to follow that introduction from Buddy.
Well, I just want to say thank you for having me up here this evening. Anytime I get to come out and stand up for the Rock and what Buddy brings into Kensington, into the community, Jesus first, my church is my family second, and it's just been a privilege to be a part of all this.
You know where you've experienced it at life at the most difficult places.
Yes.
What was it that made you see the light and gave you the ability to get from where you were to where you are?
Well, that could take a whole
couple shows.
Couple shows, yeah. But I just got to tell you, gentlemen, I wasn't raised out in the streets. I come from New Jersey, upper class family, but opioids brought me to the city. And to make a long story short, after a while, when you get involved in that, eventually you're going to come to a point where, honestly, the opioids aren't going to work anymore. So you're going to be faced with either what next,
right?
You know what I mean? There's nothing left, and I was at a point where all I could do was just ask God, if you're real, please show me who you are. Show me anything. If you show me anything, I'll follow. And he took the taste. He took drugs away from me like that, and then put a place called The Last Stop and Rock Ministries into my life. And ever since then, 10 years, taken off.
Buddy, can I ask you to weigh in and describe, go back to that very first time that you met Brian Weimer, and explain for us what that was like compared to who Brian is today?
Yeah, well, Brian, when I met Brian, he was actually he was sober.
I was sober.
He was clean, and so but I've when you meet somebody like Brian prior to his stopping drugs, they're bent over, they're scratching, they have sores all over them. We have folks now who live that. He was homeless, so everybody was like Brian. I mean, they're just they're constantly jonesing and fiending for the next drug, the next high, the next whatever it takes to resolve that void that's been built up in their life. So, but to see Brian now.
Amazing.
He's involved heavily with the Rock and just under a discipleship, what we call, and through constant, Bible studying and learning God's word and learning that we all talk about a higher power in recovery,
Sure.
and that's a beautiful thing. The higher power that we talk about is Christ, and he understands that. I'm proud of him. He said it's the first thing he said, right?
Yeah.
Well. First off, congratulations, Brian.
Thank you.
You're an inspiration of unparalleled. Believe me, I one thing want to get across, and that I think what we're trying to accomplish here is people. They're not, we talk about individuals who suffer amidst the opioid epidemic in terms of statistics often. And let me tell you something. Buddy, you hit it like there's no tomorrow. And John Kane also touched based on the process. Sounds pretty simple. Somebody breaks a leg, or somebody has it's an injury. Next thing you know, they're taking pain medications and it gets out of control.
Exactly.
And next thing you know, they don't have anything powerful, or the heroin is cheaper. That could be your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister, your mother, your father. And that's one of the things I want to get across. And looking, and having the opportunity to meet Brian and seeing the work that Buddy's doing, there's hope. Brian, let me ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
Having been through what you've been through, when you meet individuals who are at that vulnerable stage, how important is the experience that you've had at the lowest levels, and then to be able to overcome and address it every day? How important is that experience in dealing with somebody and letting them know they have hope?
They trust me. They trust me. I mean, basically, I know I can look in somebody that's strung out in their eyes, and they can look in mine, and we connect because I know what they're going through. It's just it's getting them to the point to understand that honestly, methadone's not the answer. Suboxone. It's what I have come to find that is true. Honestly, Jesus, getting yourself involved with the right people, biblical. And things will start moving in your life,
Well, one of the things we're going to talk about, and I want to talk about it. Now, Joe, we got 2 minutes left in this segment. I want to touch base more on Rock Ministries, and as we roll the show out, Joe, Buddy, tell me, and tell our listeners what Rock Ministry is, and in other words, what they could expect if they were to actually go and see it, and what the process is like.
Well, what we have is a building that's 3 stories high, 15,000 square feet, and every room there is designated to help kids. Whether it's through tutoring them for their school, whether it's the sports. We have 5 right now. We have 5 national champions, boxing champions that come out of the Rock. We have a grappling program that's amazing. I mean, we have some really tough kids that can really handle themselves. And then we have we have many outreaches, that we go out. We feed the homeless, not only feed their bellies, but we feed their, faith. I often tell the folks, when you feed your faith, you starve your doubts, And so when we give them food, we also give them the Word of God, which I think is paramount. We have a coffee house every other night. We're opening up a thrift store. We have missionary families that we have that's designated on several blocks that we have outreaches to the blocks in the area. It's a tough, dark area, but yet we bring them hope. And so there's often times where families are just up against it and they have nothing, and then we somehow, some way, we find the resources to help these families.
Part 1 of our series here on Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor, the opioid epidemic on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. A special show tonight with Buddy Osborn, Brian Weimer in the studio tonight, joining us, sharing his story. Brian, before we go to break, just a quick question. Don't need a long answer, but just a quick one. If you had the ability to close your eyes and wake up tomorrow living a different world, would you do it?
No.
We can't make anyone be a believer in Christ. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to present it in a way that they will understand it and that they'll realize that they're not throwaways. The same letter that the lady sent me, you understand what I'm talking about, is what I'm giving to these kids.
Buddy Osborn with some comments and audio from the Jim Lampley special on HBO. Welcome back, everyone, to Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. We lead you into St. Joe's basketball tonight as they take on the Bonnies of St. Bonaventure. You'll hear all of the live action on 1210 WPHT. And 1 week from tonight, next Saturday night, we'll be right back here live. And it's our Jobs Week, our first kickoff of Jobs Week. That'll be 1 week from tonight. J-Doc, should be a fantastic show. Week number 2 of 2018, and a lot of big surprises for our listening audience in 2018.
Everything jobs. We're going to continue that. This is going to be a hub for jobs here in on 1210 every Saturday night at 7 o'clock with PhillyLabor. We're going to continue our conversation with Buddy Osborn. Buddy, first of all, to say that I'm awed by what you do every day for people is an understatement. You're getting national recognition on HBO and a ton of other programs. So, but I want to talk about the formula. What you do a lot of unbelievable things, but let's talk about the formula of the boxing, because I read up a little bit on it, and the faith, the combination of those two things. What does it do for somebody? What how does boxing help them with everyday tasks?
Yeah, I mean, well, listen. First of all, I mean, I'm a former boxer, so a fighter, so maybe I'm partial. But I think if you can go in a ring and defend yourself, and then learn how to train and discipline yourself for combat sports, you can do anything. So to me, it's a no-brainer.
So the discipline, the training. Brian, does that make you were going to say something?
No, just listen to Buddy.
Well, feel free to. No, but I mean those things that you learn in sports, those disciplines obviously help you in life.
Yes, they do. Yeah, and I think for me personally, I think that the boxing in the inner city is in the urban setting is just simply amazing, because every kid. Let me tell you something. I've seen kids come in. They come in with their pants hanging down. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're all G'd up.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And then all of a sudden I say to them, I said, hey, you ever fight? And they'll say, tip always, because I ain't never lost. I said, you ain't never lost. I said, how do you hold your hands? So they don't know how to hold their hands. Right. But what happens is that, so then what we do is we get them on the line, and then we get their hands up and their chin down, and we get them stepping, and we're speaking to them, and we're talking to them, and they're responding. Normally, they're not listening to the police, they're not listening to the teachers, they're not listening to their parents. And so then all of a sudden, Joe, they start to respond, and then there's a relationship that's developed out of that. And then, of course, then you train them for competition, and it's a great sport for these kids in the inner city. Now, listen, to me, I'm not interested in seeing champions of the world. If that happens, then I told Jim Lampley that, then that's fine. I mean, I believe one day we will have a champion of the world one day out of the Rock. But I'm more interested in champions for Christ. I think that when a kid understands that God has a purpose and a plan for his life, and that God holds these kids in the palm of his hand, and that there's hope in that, in embracing their faith, then there's some amazing things that take place in this kid's life. There's a confidence that he understands it, that he's not condemned anymore. There's no condemnation in him. There's a feeling that as Scripture says that he can do all things through Christ who strengthens him. You see, that's the solution. And we're seeing some great success.
Buddy, how hard is it for a 14-year-old when they walk out of the door at Rock Ministries?
Well, it's hard. It's difficult for a 40-year-old to walk out the door if they're not equipped for it, you know. And that's a good question. Look, we minister 35, 40 feet from the #1 drug corner in the country, or actually in the state, top 5 in the country. You have the purest heroin sold. So we teach our kids, man. Listen, this is your neighborhood. This is where you live. You be proud of it. It's not the exterior that that I want the kids to be dealing with. It's the interior. It's their heart. And once their heart is shaped and transformed to the point where they have confidence that no matter where they live, Christ grew up in Nazareth. That was a hood. You know what I mean? It was, you know.
And these kids are getting structure, and they're getting communications, and they're getting tutoring and spirituality. Yes. You know, that a lot of them have never had before.
They've never had. They didn't. Well, not only that, it's structure. There's an opportunity for them to listen to the truth and to gain knowledge and understanding and purpose and.
Out of the, and I don't know if you can do this, but how many you say you get 20 people walking through your door, how many stay?
Well, I don't take a look at how many people stay and how many people roll, because let me tell you, I'm 58 years old. 50 years ago, I remember when I was at the YWCA on Kensington Avenue. This little old man and his wife would get us, and we put us in on a Sunday school, and he would teach us hymns and this and that. 50 years ago, this man planted a seed in my life.
Right, he'll be back.
And my point of it is, so all these kids that come in, if you come in today, and I'm living 10 years from now, guess what? You're going to have the same message. It's not going to change, son. You can do this. You can do this. You can do this because God has a plan for your life.
Contact information. If there's somebody out there listening, a mother or father who's listening, who has a child who's out there in this world that may be unfortunately hit by the opioid epidemic or whatever situation, how can they get in touch with you, and what is the qualifications?
Well, here's the thing. If somebody wants to get in touch with us, they can go to our website, therockphilly.org. And we're on the lookout for missing persons all the time. People are in there showing us picture of their son, of their daughter. We see it all the time. In fact, we have many pictures hanging up on the walls. So if our kids see it, so we can approach the people, the missing child, missing person. So they can contact us with therockphilly.org and follow us on Instagram, though, the Rock Philly. That's a big one because we're always putting something up that's fresh to what we're doing and
sure.
and what's happening, you know.
And does it cost any money for a kid to?
Yes, it does cost zero. It costs nothing. Just to see the kid come in and we it's zero. Nobody pays anything. Nothing.
Buddy, I don't know what to say. I mean, I can't thank you enough for being here. Of course, Brian, this Buddy Osborn is what a true hero looks like, and somebody you've given your life, and you're changing lives, and you give hope to people on a daily basis. And certainly, the Philadelphia Building Trades is, you're the chaplain there, and you heard what John Kane said. I mean, you're talking about labor leaders. Who are well-respected individuals. Buddy goes to the meetings and is the spiritual leader there. And so I want to thank you for everything that you're doing, man. It's just it's an honor to be here sitting next to you. And of course, Brian,
thank you so much.
Congratulations on your recovery because, man, you're an example that people can look up to.
Buddy, I'll give you last word before I go to the close.
Yeah, I'm very grateful, especially for the building trades. They are... every one of them, they're all the business managers. They're great men, and they're very supportive. Especially Johnny Doc over the years, he's been just an amazing friend and a guy that just is not in it for himself, And so with all the building trades, we love them.
Absolutely. Well, We love you too, pal. Let me tell you
Amen.
something. Thank
All
you
right,
so
good
much.
deal.
Unbelievable.
Buddy Osborn,
my
well
man.
done. Here tonight on Saturday Night Live with PhillyLabor on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. We're presented by Weinerman Pain and Wellness. We're powered by Pond Lahaki. We're driven by Chapman Ford, and our good friend Jim Stevenson. We're supported by the Sonesta Hotel. On behalf of J-Doc, on behalf of Buddy Osborn, Brian Weimer, thank you again. And everybody listening, I'm Joe Krause. See you next time.
This program is a paid commercial announcement and in no way represents the views of WPHT or its management.